All right, good morning, everyone. It's time for our panel to start, talking about CISOs under indictment, case studies, lessons learned, and what's next. So I will hand it over to them, and I hope you have a great session.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all your work here. Hi all! Waking you up. That was really rude of me, right? That was violent. Shouting at you like that in the morning. What's wrong with me? Don't you guys answer? Anyway, you don't have enough time. Appreciate you coming in early morning. I would like to say a couple of words about the way I moderate, just so the audience forgives me, because the people on stage would, I hope. I cut people off. And I try to facilitate discussion in a way where everybody's a moderator and cuts people off. So I just wanted to put it out there in advance so you understand we don't actually hate each other that much, right? We're trying to make sure the panel is not like 15 minutes of let's talk about what we do, introductions, then moving on to other things. And now let's each hear from everybody's opinion about point X and Y and so on and so forth. So thank you for coming in early morning and thank you for agreeing to participate in this violent discussion. I'm Gadi. I'm going to be the moderator today. And I'd like to quickly introduce everybody on the panel. I'll start with Joe Sullivan over there, who has become well known in our industry, after he was well known in our industry, for reasons of an indictment. And he used to be CISO for Uber and
Facebook and Cloudflare.
okay, nowhere important, really. Then we have David, and honestly, I would like to say David is the CISO for Oracle Cloud, but he's done so much for entrepreneurship over time that I just want to appreciate him for that as well. And then Charles has also been doing quite a bit to try and help new CISOs get into the industry, teach, support. He used to be the CISO of Citibank, right?
Yeah, and Deutsche Bank, and JP Morgan.
There you go. My memory isn't what it ever was. I also would like to quickly mention that Joe has been doing a lot for Ukraine, gathering a lot of equipment. Would you like to spend just 10 seconds on that? Tell us a little bit what you do.
Sure. I'm the CEO of a nonprofit called Ukraine Friends. If you have laptops at your company, you probably store them in the back room after a couple of years when your employees want new laptops. I see at least one person in this room who's already donated laptops to our nonprofit. And we take those laptops, we bring them to Ukraine, and we set up kids who are stuck in remote learning who've lost a parent in the war. So if you have any laptops at your company that you'd love to donate that we can bring to kids, that would be amazing. Reach out to me, please.
Thank you. So on that note, let's just start. When we kind of met a month ago to discuss what we want to say on the panel, one thing kept coming up. Things are heating up for the CISO. What does that mean, Joe?
Well, I think things are heating up for CISOs in that the role is getting a lot more attention now than it ever did before, and expectations are much higher. And the challenge for a lot of people in the role is that they got in the role or they thought about getting in the role before the expectations and before the heat. And so some CISOs feel like they're the frog that's in the water that's starting to boil, and they don't like that feeling, and they want to kind of make sure that they're doing the right things to navigate that heat.
So for a little bit of background before David steps in, CISOs are literally under indictment. Joe stood before a judge, and the judge said, I don't understand this. What's going on here, right, for several reasons. Now we have Tim Brown, who was supposed to be on this panel, and his legal team suggested that's not a good idea at this stage from SolarWinds. Right? The thing is, we wanted to put in the CISOs who were and are under indictment on stage, and everybody said yes, including Joe, but legal teams just did not abide by that. So I asked CISOs who could do it, or people who were CISOs previously, to come on stage. But please, let's continue. Charles, then David.
Well, Gabby, one thing is...
David, then Charles.
Yeah. Now, one thing is, like, how many people in the audience are CISOs or heads of security? Okay. I think that's important. So the one thing I was going to say is why it's the heat is ultimately is if you actually don't have any, you don't have a RACI, you don't actually have rules and responsibilities, right? Then who are they going to point to when there's a problem? Who raised their hand a second ago? You.
You're the one. So I actually wore this shirt specifically. It says CISO on top, but under that it says Chief Incident Scapegoat Officer. So you're the scapegoat right there.
But I mean, the truth is but that title has been the truth for decades. I think the point that Joe brought out now is it's changed the personal risk calculus for people who are thinking about becoming CISOs, all right? Historically, the risk calculus was bad stuff happens, I'm going to get fired, I'll go on to my next job. You never thought the risk calculus is bad stuff happens, my family gets bankrupted, I might go to jail, and I will never work again. That's a very different risk calculus. And so I think that's sort of driving the phone calls Joe is getting. But the heat is up also because the reality is you've got these entities in government who are responding to a huge rise in cybercrime, and in a way that no one can hide it, all right? It's not like in the old days where if an incident happened, like most people wouldn't notice. When stuff happens today, the whole world notices.
So I would like to take it from you for a second, go to Joe. You're getting calls. How often do you get them, and what do people ask you for?
Yeah, so for a long time, I've been getting calls from people who are considering taking on a CISO role. And typically they would call and say, hey, Joe, how do I get the job? What do I say when I get interviewed by a CFO or a general counsel or the people I never talked to before? Now I get two different calls. Call one is, do I really want the job? You know, instead of saying, help me get the job, I get, am I crazy for thinking I still want the job? And then the second question I'm getting, I never used to get, which is the sitting CISO or security leader who calls me and say, hey Joe, I noticed more lawyers are starting to show up at my meetings, or I'm feeling uncomfortable, or we're in the middle of an incident and I think I might need independent representation. So two different types of calls that I get now that I didn't used to get, and both of those are people who worried about themselves because of how the role has changed in the last few years.
Joe, do you feel or know that, I mean, I can no longer say we, but for the sake of this panel, that we are targeted right now? And by who or whom?
Well, I think we are targeted, and it's not unintentional. It's like Charles said, the world of cybersecurity has become of critical importance to the world and every person in it now. Every business is dependent on the internet, every single one. And every consumer is dependent on the internet every single day for government services and everything else. And yet, the quality of security that we've been delivering hasn't kind of grown up at the same pace. And so what I think has happened, and you can look at the Biden administration cybersecurity policy document from last March, it said it's time to shift responsibility to the organizations with the ability to do something. And they meant the corporations.
Yeah, but it's scary because when they talk about shifting responsibility to the corporations, the reality is most corporations have no wherewithal to really take on that responsibility in light of the threat landscape that we have. And so
Hold your mic closer. Hold it closer.
It's nice to say that.
Hold it like when you're rapping.
Okay, that's going to be dangerous. It's nice to say they need to take more responsibility, but then we also need to give them better tools by which they can do that, all right, including things like good definitions.
Yeah, but whose job is it to? So all right, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I'll wear the government hat. I think your corporations need to do more. We're going to turn up the heat. That's what the administration just said with that policy last year. What CISOs are now saying to me in return is, hey Joe, can you go tell the story about what the judge said in your case? Because the judge said something very specific. He said, where's the CEO? And I think that's where the focus is going to evolve to go in the next couple of years. I think in the SolarWinds case, when the SEC starts to dig in deep, they're going to look and they're going to see this is a security team that was trying its best with limited resources.
I would actually like to push back on that a little bit. One thing that surprised me as an individual was when I looked at the case of the prosecutor. You used to be a federal prosecutor, one of the first to deal with cybersecurity. And when I look at it now, I'm saying, this is like watching Law and Order. This is now about the people, the 12 jurors who need to make a decision without understanding anything about security, where you could come in and try and say, look, Russia was after me. But they will look and say, well, there was an email 10 years ago that said, oh yeah, let's make sure it doesn't burn down when I leave, and therefore you didn't have good enough security. How do you protect yourself as a CISO? We used to be just IT people, we're executives now, but I still don't think I want the government coming after me. How do I protect myself?
Governance, policy, definition. I mean, I think one of the things that we see, like with the SEC, first of all, throw away CISO. It's irrelevant what your title is. Tim, when SolarWinds event happened, wasn't the CISO. He just happened to be the most senior security person. So titles are irrelevant. So ignore that part of it. But when you think about what they're doing, it's mostly because there isn't good governance and you don't necessarily know what the CISO's roles and responsibilities are. David's point about the RACI earlier, all right? CFOs, it's a pretty clear view of what is a CFO supposed to do. There's history there. There's growing history in certain industries around the chief compliance officer, all right? And the SEC is actually looking at that as a model for thinking about CISOs in the future. But there is
What
no
does that
definition
mean?
for what a CISO's job is.
So can you actually double down on that for a second?
Sure.
And talk about, number one, what does that mean? And number two, where do you see the CISO role going?
So what it means specifically is the SEC has historically said that if you are a chief compliance officer, if they viewed you as having done your best effort, just because the company fails, it doesn't necessarily mean you as an individual in that role has failed, all right? And I think if you have an understanding of what a CISO's job is, a CISO could be doing everything in their power, but because of culture, governance, budget, and other things, they're still going to fail. And so the theory is that would be a shield, a legal shield for CISOs potentially.
I'd like to go back to a moment of, of the roles and responsibilities, the RACI, things like that. And it's all about documentation. Who has clear documentation of your role and responsibility?
Please
At your
raise your
company.
hands.
Anyone?
Everybody raise your hands. Come with me. Do it. Everybody,
Like-
come on in the room. Raise your hands. Don't leave me hanging.
Like
You're making me feel
7%,
bad.
5% of the audience has clear roles and responsibilities documented. So I'm going to say, guess what? You're in trouble, right? Because you're to blame. It's not documented, so why can't you be blamed?
Yeah, but to a certain extent, like those. So for 7 years, I had to listen to people talk about my case, and they would say, I would come into the back of a room like this, and there'd be 3 lawyers up here, and they'd be saying, okay, you won't turn out like Joe if you did this, this, and this. And I was sitting back there, and I was like, wait a minute, we did all those. We had an incident response policy. We had the equivalent of D&O insurance.
What would you ask people to do differently now so they don't end up in front of a judge like you did?
Yes. So every
Be
situation.
specific.
Yeah. So I think we need to embrace really objective standards, really clear documentation of them to the board. Like, we got to get away from the world of all the decisions were made by the security team. They need to be made at the CEO and board level, and they need to sign off on everything, and then accountability is going to move there. Like, Charles, you brought up about how the SEC talks about the CFO. Well, go back in time 25 years ago. It wasn't so clear.
Correct.
25 years ago, eBay went public in 1998 with 200 people in the company, because that was before Sarbanes-Oxley. So companies played a lot differently around the finances than now. So 25 years later, finance has a very disciplined, distinct way of doing things that took 25 years to get to, and the CEO has to sign the line, right? And if the CEO has to sign the line, then the CEO is going to make sure it gets enough money. And that's what I think we need to get to, is a place where the CEO has to sign the line.
And this is one of the places where I hate to say government can have some impact. If you take a look, CISA in one of its recent drafts in the AppSec space basically sort of slid in there a draft attestation where the theory is if you sell software to the US government, the CEO of the company has to attest that you comply with their software development practice requirements. And that's going to be a game changer, all right? Because it's not just the issue around who's making what risk decisions. A lot of people foolishly think CISOs actually make budget decisions, all right? I was a CISO for 20 years. I could ask, I could never decide. I don't know about you. How many in here make your own budget decisions? You say, I need this much money, and you get
You
that much
bastards.
money.
Oh, nobody raised their hand? Okay.
No, there's one person over there.
You bastard.
2%. 2%. Okay.
I want to find out what company you work for later, because that's a good company if you just ask and they give. Most of the CISOs I know haven't had that experience, and so the idea of being setting things that are objective, I think will help, because a lot of us today are very used to making sort of very wishy-washy sort of statements, and we have to be a lot more precise.
Speaking of wishy-washy, David, we just discussed quite a bit about how it needs to be everybody's shared responsibility, joint responsibility, whatever the current buzzword is, right? How do we actually make it happen? Because it's your ownership of the responsibility, but you don't really have authority.
Well, I think going back to what Joe said here as an element is that everybody that CISO, so who in your technology companies, who else do you have to work with? You have to work with the developers, the engineers, you have to work operations. Are you going to take a patch or not? Is it your decision and only your decision, right? No, it's a partnership. You've got to build these standards, right? For lack of a better term, I like to call it standard, across all your partners and your executives, saying, these are the standards we're going to live by, these are the standards we're going to make decisions by, and it's documented, it's public inside your company, and so then when anything comes up, it's crystal clear who's making the decision, and are you violating that standard or not, right? And I think that makes it much, much easier.
I think one step farther you can take it, and this, and I come from the banking world, obviously. One of the things that was really cool that the banks had to do after the last financial crisis was banks had to actually develop risk tolerance statements. And your board of directors had to approve the risk tolerance statements. And that gave you now this sort of framework all the way up to the board to talk about what was acceptable and what wasn't. And that changes the nature of the decisions that you make because of the board. And at least for public companies, the boards are the representatives of the shareholders, the owners.
So I would like at this point, while we continue to go through the topics we want to talk about, to ask the audience to start thinking of questions or directions. Thinking about questions is often like, what? I'm supposed to ask a question now? But what would you like to hear from this panel? These are the microphones right here. Please feel free to step up anytime during this panel, as opposed to just at the end, and come in and talk to us. I would like to turn us in a slightly different direction. The SEC is coming after us, or is it? What are they actually looking for? They came up with a lot of things, released a lot of things, went after Tim, right? What is it specifically that has changed for the CISO? And what do we do about it?
Let me jump in for a sec. I think that if you look at the SEC's case against SolarWinds and you look at my case, you'll actually see one commonality that I think is really important to notice, which is the SEC is using the tool that they have, which is they can go after companies that make misstatements that are material. Or if they, so they're actually, their focus is not on whether SolarWinds had good security practices. Their focus is on what did they say, what did they promise, what did they underdeliver in terms of their promises. Because that's the tool that the SEC has. And in my case, it was the FTC talking about deceptive trade practices by the company. So the tool that these enforcement authorities have, they're not by legislation allowed to go look at our security practices per se, but they are allowed to look at everything we say. And how many of you as a security leader actually get up every morning and think about what are all the things my company is saying about our security right now? Because those are the things that...
Including in private emails in the organization.
Right, because those are the things that the company is being measured on. What did you say in your privacy policy? What did you say in your 8K? What did you say in your 10K? And I remember, like, if we were focusing on Tim's case right now, I'm pretty sure he didn't personally see or review some of those 8 and 10 cases.
And wasn't there
that
a
the
whole
company's on the
deal
hook for.
about what they wrote with the boilerplate thing on their website? We use the best security technologies to protect you. Wasn't that used against him?
Yes. And so, like, one of the takeaways that I have from, like, looking at the pattern of cases is that security leaders need to actually pay attention to the content that their company's putting out and say, maybe, if you're going to say something about security, can you at least check with the security team first to make sure it's accurate?
Yeah. One other thing that the SEC said, just as a quick point, they said that the nature of the fraud committed by SolarWinds was such that even if there had not been a breach, they would still have brought the action against the company. All right? The breach just gave them the opportunity to notice the issue, but breach or not, well, they were going to have the prosecution. And one other thing, we've been focusing a lot on the SEC, but like if you're a U.S. company, don't forget all the state attorney generals. You talk to the folks at Progress IT, they have close to 30 attorney generals doing inquiries right now. All right? I had an incident way back in my time, and attorney generals are not fun.
Joe, you're not fun. Just so you know.
Right. I see people here, so we should let someone come and take use of the microphone.
So most of us that raised our
Your name,
hands that
sir?
were CISOs
Just
are
your name,
card-carrying
sir?
CISOs. We're not fiduciary CISOs. And consequently, we don't have a lot of the insurance or protection that the company gets during a class action lawsuit or legal actions. What's your advice for those of us who are facing this? What insurances, what protections, what the company should provide, what we should get for ourselves?
I can take this one. I've talked to a lot of CISOs about this over the last few years. So, like what we typically talk about it in terms of this concept of D&O insurance, which means that if you're at a certain level in a company, almost automatically you get that insurance. It doesn't matter if it's called D&O insurance. What you want is insurance that'll protect you personally if you need to get a lawyer during litigation and the costs get covered. First off, indemnity is not without limitation, and that's something you should talk about with the lawyers. But from a practical standpoint, a lot of the CISOs that I know who got nervous about this, they've actually gone back to their company and they've negotiated. And they don't go back and negotiate just saying, hey, look at this SolarWinds case, look at Joe's case. I need to have independent representation. What they do is they actually go back and they say, hey, General Counsel, you probably need independent representation also. We should do something for all of us who are dealing with these types of incidents. And that way you get it out of it just like if you're the CISO and you show up and you say, hey, I want all these special protections just for me, and the rest of the execs are going to look at you and say, you mean just to do your job? You want these protections? They all get fired too if they don't perform at the top level. They all, get in trouble too if they commit fraud or different things like that. So you want to kind of think about it from the whole exec team should have a certain level of protection from and then the second part of it is you want to be able to get independent representation when you think you need it. But imagine you're in the middle of a security incident and all of a sudden you call the general counsel and you say, I need independent representation. Are they going to trust you the rest of that incident? No. So you actually want to do it much in advance. So you want to have those conversations so that when you get to an incident, you already have your lawyer approved. Because you don't want to be thinking about trying to get a lawyer approved during the middle of an incident, on top of trying to get budget for it. So I think you want, and it's not about whether you're covered by insurance, it's about whether you get permission for the company to pay for a lawyer for you at certain times. And I think a lot of people should be having that conversation now, and there's enough cases out there, and organizations have been putting out documentation, like SINET put out their best practices document, and I've seen a couple others like it, that say best practices, CISOs should have these things in their contracts. And I would use those.
Awesome, thanks.
As a quick note, if you want to Google SINET, S-I-N-E-T, it's pretty famous in the CISO circles for facilitating a lot of communication conferences by Robert Rodriguez. And they put out the document. You can find it pretty easily. Some of us also worked at the Team 8 VC, if you know it, on a document called CISO Legal Guide. So you can look that up as well. There have been quite a few documents out there, and these would be helpful. Before we move to you in a second, and hi, anybody else has any quick, specific advice to what we should do? For example, mine would be get your own insurance, maybe even twice, not just through the company. Anybody else?
I think you'll find it hard to find your own insurance.
If anybody finds it hard to find your own insurance, please reach out to me and I'll tell you what other CISOs have found. Anybody else? Okay. Charles, yeah. I saw you raising your mic slightly. To point it. Okay.
Okay.
Him, please speak.
I'm Gary Warner from the University of Alabama at
Gary
Birmingham.
is one of the awesomest people in the world. I haven't seen him in person of about 20 years probably. And he has trained some of the best people in cybersecurity today through his work.
Thank you, Gary. And Gary's been a leader in this, in getting people to communicate for a long time.
Did you just call me fat?
Okay, so here's a particular question, and hi, Joe, as well. In a lot of these SEC lawsuits, not just the ones we've talked about, but also Binance and Coinbase and others, the things they're quoting are like, a security employee said this in a Slack channel, and the things they're saying are, some of them are horrible. You know, like, we might as well wave a sign that says, we do money laundering, free cake here. How do you as a CISO deal with the fact that employees are freely speaking with one another in ways that might be captured and used against them in the future? Like, what would be the CISO response to that to prevent it coming back and biting you in the ass later?
I don't think there is an easy answer to your question. I think there are two parts to it. One is, I think, raise awareness about just being more professional in your communications, all right? If you want to vent, go into, like for my team, I always said, if you want to vent, come into my office and yell at me, don't put it in writing. And so you can create a culture that allows people to communicate more professionally and still have a freedom of expression. The other thing, though, comes back to governance around risk, all right? Because if you look through some of what the SEC wrote, they actually held the idea that there were accepted risks against the entity. If you've got good process, risk acceptance is how you live. I mean, my last firm, I think we had 1,400 risk acceptances when I retired, all right? But we had an extraordinarily tight governance process that looked at the materiality of the risk, that had sign-offs, both from the security side, the independent risk side, and the business based on that. And so if you have good governance and you have good process around how you escalate and manage risks, I think it takes a lot of the danger from some of that chatter away.
I'll give a slightly different point of view, which is, I don't think we want to spend all day long trying to tell our teams not to point out bad security. And look, we hire people on our teams who are security absolutists, that they're going to fight and push for things, and probably their calibration on the business is going to be off, but that's okay. It's our job as a leader to get our team calibrated. If we spend all day long trying to make sure that our team doesn't say the wrong thing, then we're not focusing on getting good security in place. So there's a balance there. And second of all, like, the title of this is CISOs Under Indictment. Actually, only one CISO's been indicted. Me. But like, I want to point out something, like, only one's been indicted, none have gone to jail, and how many security leaders are in this room right now, and then magnify it over the course of this conference. Like, we should be paying attention to the advice we're giving here, but it shouldn't become the dominant thing in your head every day when you're doing your job. Like, we all joined this profession because we cared about protecting people, and that should be our primary focus every day. And we should definitely educate our team on, like, look, you know, I might get indicted if you say that about me, but then they'll say twice as much. You know what I mean? We got to keep a little, we like to have a bunch of people on our teams who are passionate about security, who are uncomfortable when the company takes risks. And so we're going to have to find ways to kind of channel that energy positively, but we don't want to squash it completely.
I'd like to jump in. One quick thing is an element is like when someone finds a security bug at your company, every company needs to have a place that you file it and you accept it and you investigate it, right? So the same type of things, the people that Chatter or the Slack or Blind or whatever, is like, no, file the bug, come into the system so you can actually analyze it, you understand it, you can take a risk assessment. So it's been documented, and you take accountability that it's been looked at, right, versus things. So that's one way is to try to help with that.
Thank you, Gary. Sir?
Hi, folks. Phil Byer. Thanks for the panel. Fantastic. And Joe, kind of on the concluding statements just a minute ago, kind of how you were commenting about how we maintain balance and perspective in all of this. I have a kind of crystal ball question for you guys. So obviously realize that you don't have the answer, but I'm curious as to your professional opinion. How long before some of this settles out? So over the last few minutes, CFO role was mentioned, and other roles we know at the C-level have kind of leveled out in terms of the expectations of the role, the accountability, all of that. We've seen all of this volatility and disruption, particularly from SEC action recently and the stuff that you went through, Joe, over the last, 12, 18 months, though your stuff started earlier than that. When do we get to a kind of norm, right? Because we're not there yet. We've talked about standards that were mentioned earlier. We've talked about that in the entirety of our profession. So the last 30 or so years, we still don't have a common standard, and we probably never will because of, we all have a different idea about it. So what's gonna get us to something that's more stable than where we are today, where we're all kind of worried, because this is a pretty full session. So.
I could go on a rant about the standards that we give ourselves.
Sure.
I think we've tried so hard not to break ourselves into jail that most of our security standards are not good enough. They're all, we call it a maturity model, and we're okay being measured at less than mature and allowed to launch a product to the world. Sarbanes-Oxley doesn't allow you to be on a financial transparency journey before you go public. You have to have your stuff together. And I feel like it's not going to end until we have some clarity on standards. And there's, beforehand, we were in the speaker room, and we ended up having a big scrum with a whole bunch of other speakers where we were talking about standards, and none of us can agree. But sooner or later, someone's going to give us a standard top down, and then we're going to be held to it, and that would be great.
The question becomes...
Well, no, that won't be great. All right.
It would be great because we can know what we're aiming for.
Yeah.
If it's impossible, then...
No. Having the standard is great. Having it handed to us top down is where I think there's the danger, all right? Because the reality is the government hasn't necessarily done a good job of engaging with the CISO community in trying to come up with this. One of the things I was involved with was, as a knee-jerk reaction when Tim's indictments came out, one of the things we said was, if we had a standard of due diligence that was well-defined and well-accepted, this wouldn't happen. And so I led this effort of a group of about 50 CISOs, and we drafted a standard of due diligence. It's about 10 pages. It's about half governance, half technical controls. And I showed it to a lawyer, and he said, burn it! Because he said, if this document ever got out into the public right now, lawyers would use it as a weapon against companies because no one sort of can live up to that standard today. And so...
Right, but the reason we can't live up to the standard today is because we don't get the support from the rest of the organization in terms of the CEO saying, do what security said, meet this minimum standard, here's the budget, do it. If the CEO had accountability, which I would hope when that top-down standard comes, in the same way with Sarbanes-Oxley, the CEO has accountability. If we have a bright line standard, say, take CIS, we just take CIS and say that's the standard, and then the CEO has to sign saying that you can meet that standard, that would be great.
Yeah. But aren't we going to then end up, though, I do like standards to a degree, but then we're going to have every government or every state, the United States, is going to have their own standard. Every EU country is going to have their own standard. They may, just like we're seeing now a little bit with Gen AI, we're going to have 50 standards we all have to comply to.
You have it in privacy today.
Security is that important now.
Yeah, and the truth is you have 50 different standards today from a privacy perspective, just in the United States. And if you're a multinational organization, you do. I think standard harmonization is a good thing, but I think getting any standards out there to begin with would be a starting point. But back to your question, my guess, 5 to 10 more years. All right.
I want to highlight really quickly a couple of things that were said here. Number one, regulators, please talk to the CISOs. I know you're thinking you're doing this, but please involve us in the process as opposed to getting to the end and asking us what we think. Okay, that's number one. And number two is please decide who regulates us, because working with so many regulators is hard. This is really interesting.
That'll never happen. All right. In my
But
last,
we
I
said
had,
we
I,
could hope.
I,
You said the word hope, right?
yeah, but again, that's
maybe.
going to some degree. There's going to be some basis based on the nature of your company. All right. My last company was a bank. My last company had physical presence in 97 countries. I had 200 different regulators. That was just the nature of the business and the geographical footprint. All right. If you are one jurisdiction company, one regulator, you have some hope for it. But if you're a multinational, it ain't never going to happen.
Okay, we can keep
Thanks,
talking about
guys.
this for. Thank you. Please, sir.
So I've been lucky enough to be a CISO and mentored a few CISOs. Sorry, been a CISO and mentored a few CISOs in my lifetime. And one of the things I've always advised, that'll be interesting perspective, is we are advisors. We don't make the business decisions. And I push that through to all the security team. Because sometimes we'll find things that we don't like, and we have to document it. And I have had the CYA documentation that made me really successful, so I was involved in every bloody business decision afterwards. But teaching that philosophy about we are advisors, we're not always the execution, there is separation of duties is key. Is that still valid in today's world, do you think, taking that philosophy?
So in the document that we wrote, we actually very explicitly wrote that. We said the CISO is a risk advisor. The risk decision is made by the business head, president, CEO, whatever you want to call the title. And so, at least from my perspective, absolutely, that's the right way to think about it.
So building on that is like we all have legal and lawyers are saying, are they the decision makers? Are we going to do this or not? They're advisors, right, of what things they're going to do. So I think the same way, it should be in the same category.
Yeah, I guess the challenge with that is if you're no longer at the company, all that documentation you created, you have no access to. And that's the challenge that I had to go through. But think about it from the standpoint of a lot of the time your team actually has to go get the work done. Mm-hmm. I have a hard time with the idea of transferring risk out of our role into like putting on a risk register or something like that. I don't think that the company is going to be off the hook if we put it on a risk register.
No.
I think there's an expectation that we talked about it at the board level
Yes.
as well, and we documented it. I've been thinking a lot more about, like, if you look at all the security products that you're getting pitched while you're here this week, how many of them are focused on prevention or detection versus after, like, how you handle an incident?
What I would like to happen here now, if you guys don't mind, we talked a lot about the Department of No, that we know how to do, right? Because that's the role. I would like to see, we spoke about how do we create the joint responsibility, how do we do all those things? I would like specific advice. What would you do now if you went back to your roles or in your role, what you have done in order to be able to facilitate better CISO? What is that? Joe.
I would do two things. Number one is I would make sure that I had a better version of a DVR to play back
What's
things.
DVR?
So back in the age before streaming, we used to record our television and then watch it later. And
Are you calling me fat?
Yes.
Windows Media Center.
No, so, but I think about how a year before my trial and the whole trial, what was the whole thing an exercise in? Trying to explain what decisions were made, who was in the room, who was consulted, who approved it, and arguing over that. If we had a better tooling for capturing all of the decisions during an incident, who was in the room, who was on the Zoom meeting, like better note-taking, all those little AI tools that now show up in every Zoom meeting. That would be part one. Part two, one of the things that I think about, in my case in particular, it was viewed that we were trying to cover something up. You know, sure, 40 people were working on the incident, but like it was portrayed as a cover-up. If legal had pulled outside counsel into some of our meetings, if we had brought in an outside IR firm into some of our process and incident response, just the fact that you had third parties in the room validating the decisions that were being made would have lowered the, I think, heat in terms of the after-the-fact scrutiny of what happened.
Yeah, I agree with those. Like, when I was in my last role, we had this cyber fusion center, and we actually had my counsel sitting in our fusion center. So
just to push back on that, I thought we did that really well at Uber in 2016 when this incident happened. Like, all the email aliases for incident response had our designated lawyer, who was appointed by legal and in the documentation as the right lawyer, they were pulled in. The right communications person was pulled in. The communications person prepared a whole plan that went all the way up the communications line of command so that if it was to go public. So it was documented very well internally. But the fact that we didn't have any third parties involved in the decision, it's easy to say, oh, that crew at Uber like huddled together and decided to bury this.
Charles, your advice.
My advice would be take a look at every governance document you've got and really make sure that it's crystal clear about roles and responsibilities, especially around who makes risk management decisions.
And I would add to that, it's not always about escalation. You can also create elevation path. David.
Well, I've said it before, kind of building on that documentation, things like that. It's really, you document everything. If you come into a new role, what are the standards? What are the policies? Are they documented, or is it tribal knowledge, right? You know, every meeting, right? What actions were taken, who's decision maker, who was there, document it. Many of you that have known me over the years, I write the thing called the weekly dossier, the security dossier. But every meeting, everyone knows this. I've been in a meeting, right? What I say, I wrote down. Even if I'm the CISO, no one's taking notes, I'm going to take the notes. Who's there? What decisions? And it's all documented. It makes it so much easier.
All right. Sir.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about red flags for when the CISO may be a target for liability. And Joe, you mentioned when you start seeing more lawyers come into the room, and I'm wondering if you have any other indicators, like if you get asked or told, don't put that in email.
So one thing I would have to say is it's a really hard thing is you have to have the courage of your convictions to be a good CISO, all right? You have to have the courage to say that if you're, like I had this issue with one of my bosses in getting ready for a board meeting, and he wanted to present an issue to the board in a way that I was just very uncomfortable. And I basically told him, if you take this into the board meeting, and if they ask me, I am going to disagree with you in front of the board, all right? Be upfront about it. Have the courage to sort of take that view. Now, don't take that perspective on like a little bitty issue. Have some judgment, but it is much more important now to stand up for what you think is right than before. So we talked about filings, right? Tim didn't have a role in the filings that happened that were part of the prosecution. However, if you're the CISO today of a public company, you hopefully are getting to review the drafts and maybe even writing the statements that are going into your filings to the SEC. If someone above you changes the wording in that filing and you don't agree that it's proper representation, and you don't push back, you're now actually potentially creating a liability exposure for yourself, all right? Because you are now aware that a fraud has been committed and you haven't reported it, all right? And so, courage and judgment.
I just want to add one best practice. Everybody's like, hey, security teams, right? We have playbooks and we have tabletops, right? If your playbook does not include everyone in the chain of command, right? It has legal, has communications, has maybe even your executive representing the CEO, then guess what? When an incident happens, what's going to happen? You don't have the right people.
There's one other thing that I haven't seen in incident response plans that I think should be there. Some statement of integrity and values of the values of the corporation. Somebody asked me about that recently, and I was like, I don't think I've ever seen that in an IR plan.
We had it. So
Why didn't you share it with us?
So one of the things, and maybe it's not completely along those lines, but one of the things we had was this idea of commander's intent, right? Because all of our process went all the way up to the CEO and stuff. Well, what happens if the CEO and his entire management team, for some reason, are unavailable? They're in an airplane, they're in a submarine, whatever. How do you execute? And so we came up with this idea, which you get out of the military, of commander's intent. And it actually was a short statement of sort of from the CEO, their philosophy, like, we will never ever pay ransomware and some other, but that can help a little bit, I think, along those lines.
Okay, please. Thank you,
Hi,
Charles.
hi, I'm Neve Muldoon. So I am a CISO out in Europe. I was very fortunate early in my career to be through a breach, and I said I never wanted to be in one again. So I really, assess the organizations where I'm going. Are they taking it seriously? Setting the tone from the top. So what advice would you have for our CISOs that want to have a successful career as a CISO? How
One
do they
sentence
assess
each.
that culture?
One sentence each.
Interview the companies that are interviewing you.
Yep.
All right? Because I think your point is exactly right. If the company, I was talking to a company and they were asking about org structure.
One sentence each.
Okay. Good culture, good governance, a CISO can survive. Bad culture, bad governance, no matter what, the CISO's dead.
I don't think it's a survival. It's you want to do the right, a good job.
Mhm.
So.
One sentence each. I'm kidding.
I'll do it.
Please, David.
Can I see the documentation?
I think the integrity of an organization starts with the CEO, and you judge the company by the CEO.
So one quick thing before we turn to you to the last question. I think it's important for us to look at SolarWinds just for a second and mention just a couple sentences on what we learned from SolarWinds. What did you learn from SolarWinds?
I learned that we need to pay attention to what the company says.
David.
Tim's a good guy, and he's helping us lead through this change for the next 20 years.
Charles.
CEO CISO alignment is critical.
So let me read some stuff up. Read some stuff up means have made up. No, I'm kidding. Number one, fully document roles and responsibilities. Number two, we cannot wait for a Sarbanes-Oxley equivalent. Number three, be active as a participant in disclosure committee and processes. Review risks with the committee and document the results. And then we need a common framework of roles and responsibilities to become a de facto standard. I think we brought these across in this panel. I will say that as a recommended action, we should probably create a better environment for the CISO within the organization, but also I would say there are positives. For example, all the conversations that happened in different companies, giving us more budget immediately after the event, right, and elevating the role of the CISO. The Wells notice essentially drove change in the team and the board, and we need to acknowledge that we are no longer just IT people, we're executives. We need to ask ourselves, what does that mean? And then we have more of a voice. I think that's important. Please, last question.
Charles, I wanted to ask about the example you gave earlier where you had a personal disagreement with your supervisor saying, no, I don't agree with that. Like, it doesn't sound like that's enough necessarily anymore. Like, you do that, you're Joe, if something, happens, you go around them, you lose your job because you didn't follow chain of command. You're part of the decision, so the normal reporting structures don't really apply to you. So how do you address that?
I said it was a hard thing, right? Being able to have the courage of a conviction. The truth is, if my boss hadn't changed the presentation, I would have resigned. It was that simple because it would have been career suicide to go into the board and in front of the board disagree with my boss. Yeah. all right, and it was outside of what I would accept from a personal integrity perspective to go into the board with that presentation.
Quick last words.
I would just remind everybody there's only been one person indicted, one person charged, nobody gone to jail. Take this stuff, implement it, but don't let it rule your day.
I see. Join as a community, come together, set the precedent as a community, not as a union, but as a community. I think it's very important.
And feel free to seek out these documents from SINET and Team 8 on CISO legal risks and what you can do. Thank you very much for coming today. We appreciate it.